Good afternoon, everyone. We are waiting for a few more people to join in as we have a lot of people coming in at once. So as soon as it slows down, we will get started. All right, it looks like we're ready to begin. Shio Nagata, and welcome to Braving the Budget webinar. This webinar is prepared for you by the Tribal Financial Management Center in reference to the fiscal year 2021 Tribal Victim Set Aside, or TVSSA, the formula grant. And today we will be focusing on budget development. Just to let everyone know, this webinar will be recorded and will be available in approximately 2 weeks, and a link will be emailed to you. All right, Lydia, give them some instructions.
Thanks, April. Before we jump in, let's review the Zoom room. My name is Lydia Goodner. I'm today's technical specialist and here to provide a quick overview of Zoom and the features we will be utilizing to support your participation today. All audio lines will remain muted for the recording of today's session. If you have joined online with the full presentation in view on your screen, you'll notice several icons at the bottom control bar to assist with your attendee experience. I encourage you to click on the chat icon now to submit questions during or in the Q&A portion of today's session. And I know there's some conversation going on in there, so if you'd like to post something, please feel free. Dominic and Tara Ballesteros will be posting resources and relevant references to the slides in the chat window as well. If you're connected by phone using a cell or landline and would like to participate in the question and answer portion, please submit your questions to tfmc@obctfmc.org. As with all technology, we may experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session. If that happens, please be patient, and if you have any issues rejoining, join the audio and view the presentation download sent to your email. The webinar presentation should resume shortly in the event of a temporary lapse in service. If you require technical support during today's webinar, please type a message in the chat window or email tfmc@obctfmc.org. Over to you, Ann.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ann Hamilton, and I am a grant program specialist at OVC. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar, and we hope it is really helpful for you as you develop your budget. I will just be doing a quick overview of the program before we get to the main content today. Here's a snapshot of the FY 2021 Tribal Formula Solicitation that was released in April. This solicitation and this webinar is for invited grantees. Eligible applicants are entities that submitted population certifications by March 5th, 2021, and have been notified by OVC of the formula allocation. If you do not know your allocation, please email the OVC Tribal Set Aside email address that's in the solicitation, and I will also put this email address in the chat. I have also added the link to the solicitation in the chat as well. I can put it in there again just in case it didn't show up for you, just so you have it as a reference during this webinar. Here are some key deadlines and the anticipated timeline for this program. The grants.gov deadline is actually today, so hopefully you're all aware of that at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The application to be submitted in Just Grants is due on June 14th. We expect to award grants no later than September 30th, end of our fiscal year, with project start dates of January 1st, 2022. But please note that if you have a grant that's expiring in the end of September, you can choose the start date of October 1st, 2021 in your SF 424 and your project budget. In 2021, Congress authorized $100.75 million to the Tribal Set-Aside Program. OVC anticipates making 173 awards with dollar amounts that vary, which was determined by a formula. Again, the period performance start date is January 1st, and the period of performance is determined by you, the applicant. It can be from 12 to 60 months, and these will all be grants. This is just a brief overview of some examples of what you can use your funds for. The goal of this program is to provide support to tribal communities to improve victims of crime through activities such as a community needs assessment, strategic planning, victim service program development, community outreach. You can also purchase items related to victim services and other activities, obviously a wide range. And these are just some examples of the focus areas that you can support, such as sexual assault programs, domestic violence programs. I am not going to read through all of these. I understand these are very broad and don't encapsulate all the areas, but just keep in mind that OVC funds must be used to support crime victims. The following information must be included in your application. I know the solicitation includes many other attachments that need to be included, but these are the key things that we need in order for you to access funds. You will need to submit a proposal narrative, a budget detail worksheet and narrative, and application timeline. We'll obviously be spending a majority of the time together going over the budget detail worksheet and narrative. So let's just get to it. And I will now just hand it back to TSMC to talk through the objectives of the webinar and talk through the budget portion of the solicitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ann. My name is April Bird, and I'll be your producer for this event. Now I'm going to introduce you to our presenters for today's webinar, Jenny Mills and Christine Moore. Jenny, I'll hand the presentation over to you and let you and Christine introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much, April. And thanks for all of you for joining us today. My name is Jenny Mills, and I'm a Senior Training and Technical Assistance Specialist with the Tribal Financial Management Center. I'm joining you today from Buffalo, New York, home of the Seneca and Haudenosaunee people, but my heart belongs to rural Alaska, where I spent most of my career. I am pretty experienced with providing legal services to tribal members, as well as managing state, local, and federal awards for tribal communities in the victim services field. Specifically with child advocacy centers and domestic violence programs. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Christine Moore.
Thanks, Jenny, and hi, everyone. As Jenny mentioned, my name's Christine Moore, and I'm also joining you from New York, but I'm about 7 hours east of Jenny on Long Island. I'm a financial specialist with the Tribal Financial Management Center, and bring with me years of experience managing the financial aspects of federal, state, local government, private sponsored awards. But most importantly, I do have specific experience managing the financial aspects of the DOJ OJP grants from the grantee side. So now we want to just start off with a brief overview of what we hope you gain from today's webinar. Our goal is that upon completion of this webinar, you'll be able to, 1, describe the step-by-step process of budget development, 2, differentiate between allowable and unallowable costs and know where to find them, 3, use the budget detail worksheet, which we will also be referring to throughout this webinar as the BDW. So use the BDW to create the budget and the budget narrative. 4, use tips to transfer the budget numbers to the Just Grants web form. 5, identify the top 5 budget development challenges. And finally, successfully complete your TVSSA program budget. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Jenny to provide some background on the Tribal Financial Management Center.
Thanks, Christine. TFMC launched in the fall of 2018, and we work closely with your OVC grant managers and program TA providers to provide training and technical assistance, as well as other resources to support American Indian and Alaska Native grantees and grant applicants. We provide assistance with the Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Program, the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation, otherwise known as CTAS, and State VOCA Assistance Formula Grant programs. TFMC support helps build a strong financial management foundation for each community's victim services program. TFMC can assist grantees to refine and develop consistent, sustainable financial policies and procedures that enhance capacity to provide vital victim service programs in tribal communities. TFMC supports OVC by providing intensive individualized financial management TTA to OVC tribal grantees in coordination with their OVC grant managers. We do this by providing risk mitigation through individualized TA to address grantees' special conditions and/or risk factors. A few of the ways we do this is by providing individualized TA to grantees on enhancing and strengthening their existing financial policies and procedures, by supporting grantees in development of budget modifications and the accompanying grant award modifications or GAMs, by answering applicants' questions regarding new solicitations and submission processes, and by addressing audit findings and corrective action plans. We want to learn a little bit more about you today, and throughout our time together, we'll be inviting you to participate in polls. Our first question is, what type of entity do you represent? Are you a federally recognized Indian tribe, a tribal consortium, a nonprofit, or other? Looks like people are voting pretty rapidly, and it seems like the majority are from federally recognized Indian tribes, as well as some tribal consortiums and nonprofits and some others. Thank you so much, and we'll go ahead and close this poll and move to the next one. Christine?
So now we're going to jump right into the second poll question. So we want to hear from you again. When the window pops up on your screen, would you please select all options that apply for the following question? What part or parts of budgeting gives you the most difficulty? The options are allowable versus unallowable costs, indirect versus direct, personnel, fringe benefits, travel costs, construction, subaward versus procurement, equipment versus supplies, or other costs. Okay, a lot of answers coming in. And it looks like it's pretty spread out, but it looks like the majority is actually the allowable versus unallowable cost category. Okay, so we'll be covering quite a few of these in the presentation as we go through it. And so we can end that poll, please. Okay. We know you are all so excited about building your budget that you can barely wait any longer. So let's talk about what a budget is and why it's important. So what is a budget? A budget is a financial document that provides guidance for how an entity manages its funds, and a strong budget ensures that your entity achieves its goals and objectives and that the program is sustainable. Now, why is it important? The budget provides a financial guide for program implementation. It assists in effective decision-making. It supports the realization of the entity's victim services priorities. It outlines future program and financial planning, enhances opportunities for future grant funding and builds sustainability. It ensures grantees and grant managers are working from the same numbers, and it helps to avoid fraud and theft. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Jenny.
Thanks, Christine. We have a chat box question for you, and we want to know, how many years of experience do you have developing budgets? Please type your answer into the chat box. So we have a lot of answers coming through, and it looks like we have a pretty wide range, anywhere from 0 to over 20 years. So it's really exciting to have that much experience and knowledge in the room with us today. Thank you so much for giving us that information, and we'll move on. So today we're going to talk about the process. And by this point, steps 1 and step 2 are already done, and step 5 is going to be covered in other webinars. By now you've created your budget team and everyone is working together to create the budget for your project. There are 5 main steps in completing your budget as seen in this slide. So step 1, writing your project narrative. And step 2, completing your application for federal assistance, otherwise known as the SF-424. Then step 3, entering your costs into the BDW or budget detail worksheet. And step 4, writing your budget narrative for each category. And step 5, entering the budget into JustGrants. By the time you're ready to create your budget, you've already taken care of steps 1 and 2. In step 1, you'll have developed your project narrative, which outlines your project goal and objectives. You'll need to make sure your budget supports these goals and objectives. And in step 3, you'll complete your SF-424. Today, we're going to be focusing on steps 3 and 4 of the budget development process. Steps 3 and 4 will guide you in using the budget detail worksheet to create your budget. Step 3 is focused on entering your line items under each cost category, while step 4 is focused on creating the budget narrative for each cost category. Understanding the difference between allowable and unallowable costs is key to developing your budget. OVC has provided applicants with a chart of allowable and unallowable cost examples. A link to this document is in the chat box. This document should be your guide throughout the development process. Here we've provided some examples of allowable and unallowable costs under the equipment category. Under this solicitation, some vehicles are allowable while other vehicles are not. A vehicle used to transport victims to access necessary services is allowable. A vehicle used by law enforcement to conduct investigations is unallowable. Similarly, security system equipment for victim service facilities like child advocacy centers is allowable. Security system equipment for police stations would not be allowable because it's not specific to serving victims. When you're unsure whether a specific cost is allowable or unallowable, one of the first things you should ask yourself is, does this cost relate specifically to serving victims? If the answer is no, make sure you consult the allowable versus unallowable chart. And if you're still unsure, contact your OVC grant manager. So now we're going to do another poll, and we'd like you to select all that apply. Which of the following are allowable costs? Research, annual cost of living increases, life insurance, trinkets, which include hats, mugs, portfolios, etc., baggage fees, purchasing real property, or accounting software. Okay, we're getting a lot of responses in. So great job, everybody. Annual cost of living increases, life insurance, baggage fees, and accounting software are all allowable costs under the solicitation. We're going to go ahead and close that poll. And we have another poll. This time, let's see if you can spot the unallowable costs. Again, please select all that apply. Activities or services not victim service related, costs incurred outside of the project period, activities focused primarily on crime prevention, criminal justice activities, lobbying, fundraising activities, or legal services for criminal defense and tort actions. All right, it looks like most of you have voted and we can't play any tricks on you. They're all unallowable. Thanks so much. And over to you, Christine.
We all know that this has been a highly amusing presentation so far, so let's keep it going. Now that you have a better understanding of allowable versus unallowable costs, we're going to walk you through the budget detail worksheet, or the BDW. So you may be confused as to why we're including the budget detail worksheet in this webinar, since there is now an embedded budget worksheet in JustGrants. The budget detail worksheet allows you to plan and prepare your budget and your budget narrative in advance of entering the details in JustGrants. Preparing the budget in the BDW first will guide you and provide your entity a copy of your budget to keep in your own files and share with staff as needed. So where can you find this? The budget detail worksheet can be found on the Office of Justice Programs website. We're including a link to this in the chat box. And this Microsoft Excel file is user-friendly, fillable, but if you don't have access to Microsoft Excel or you experience any technical difficulties with that, they do offer a PDF version as well. So we're just going to review a few of the basics of the budget detail worksheet. So this file is where you'll enter each individual expense as well as the budget narrative for each cost category. There are 9 tabs at the bottom of the file. The first one, which you can see on the screen here, is the budget sheet instructions tab. This sheet has the instructions for the entire workbook and can be used as a reference while completing the rest of the document. This next slide shows you the budget detail tab for year 1. Within this tab and the other tabs for years 2 through 5, there are 10 cost categories: personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment supplies, construction, subawards or subgrants, procurement contracts, other costs, and indirect costs. These tabs should present a complete itemization of all proposed costs for the full period of performance expected for the completion of your project. If your performance period is only 3 years, you would leave the year 4 and year 5 tabs blank. Now, some of you may be familiar with the budget detail worksheet for the CTAS funding. However, we want to make sure that you guys know that there is a slight difference between the 2 files. So you want to make sure you use the TVSSA BDW. As I stated earlier, the BDW for the set-aside award has a tab for expenses for each year of your grant. The CTAS BDW only has 1 tab for all expenses, regardless of how many years you have. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Jenny to go through the next few parts of the worksheet.
Thanks, Christine. Now we're going to talk about cost categories. Are you confused by cost categories? Every entity has a different way of categorizing costs according to their own internal financial policies and procedures. For example, some entities have their own definitions of equipment or supplies that differs from those categories in the TVSSA solicitation. Always remember, the solicitation is your friend. When you prepare your budget, make sure to carefully read the explanations for each cost category found in the allowable, unallowable cost chart, beginning on page 16 of the solicitation. When in doubt, remember you can always reach out to your OVC grant manager and TFMC. The budget summary tab is located after the budget detail tabs for years 1 through 5. This tab is auto-populated with your totals from each budget year. The total project's cost should match the amount of your award. And remember, you won't make any corrections in this tab. Instead, make sure to address any errors in the budget detail tabs. The second to last tab is an example of a completed BDW. This is a great reference to consult while you're filling your BDW out. We'll be taking a closer look at this example while we discuss each cost category in detail. Finally, the last tab provides some helpful definitions for terms you may be unfamiliar with. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Christine, who's going to walk through more of the budget detail worksheet.
So now that we've walked through the BDW at a high level, let's soar like an eagle into the next step and go through how to build a budget in each of the 10 different cost categories. Before we get to that, we want to get an idea of how many of you would start with preparing the itemized budget and how many of you would start with the budget narrative portion. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a matter of preference, but we just wanted to get a general understanding of what you guys, our audience, would start with. So if you can just select that in the poll question. Okay, we have a lot of answers coming in. Okay, I think we can go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like the majority of you would actually start with the itemized budget section and then go into the budget narrative. So thank you for sharing that with us. So we all know that budgeting takes time, especially if you're new to it. So make sure to give yourself enough time to gather the necessary information and data to think through and discuss the various elements of the budget, and don't rush the budgeting process. On this slide that you see here, we show you a few key tasks for developing the budget. The first task is to outline your project activities. Are you implementing a new victim services program in your community? Are you expanding and/or enhancing an already existing victim services program? Next, you'll want to break those activities into specific costs. As an example, if one of those activities is to provide cultural healing services to victims, there may be costs related to supplies for that activity. Now, once you have identified your costs, you'll want to assign those costs to the appropriate cost category in the budget detail worksheet. Then you'll want to create a strong budget narrative that explains and justifies each of those costs. It's important to include your basis of computation or how you determine those estimated costs in the narrative, as this helps to justify the expense further. The last task on this list is to ensure all costs meet the requirements in a solicitation by reviewing the allowable and unallowable cost chart. We list the tasks at the end. We list this task at the end of this list, but remember that this chart is your friend throughout the entire process of developing your budget. Now we're going to walk through each of the 10 cost categories in a little bit more detail. This first section you see here is the personnel category. Here is where you will include the key personnel for your project as well as other personnel. You'll list each position by title and name of employee if you have it. If you need to hire for the position, you can simply just list to be hired in the section. You'll include the base salary and whether that base salary is hourly or yearly, the percentage of time that will be devoted to the program for each position. And please remember that compensation paid for employees engaged in grant activities must be consistent with what is paid for similar work within your organization. In the budget narrative section of this category, you'll want to include a description of the responsibilities and duties for each position in relation to fulfilling the project goals and objectives. You want to be sure that every expense you list in the line item are described in the narrative and vice versa. This next section is the fringe benefits category. Fringe benefits should be based on actual known costs or an approved negotiated rate by a federal agency. If not based on an approved negotiated rate, you'll need to list the composition of the fringe benefit package. There is one expense line per fringe benefit. For example, if your fringe benefits consist of FICA, retirement, workers' comp, and health insurance, you should have at least 4 expense lines in this section of the document. The fringe benefits included here are for the personnel listed in the personnel budget category we just talked about, and only for the portion of their base salary that directly corresponds to the time they're devoting to this project. And lastly, we just want to mention to be sure to follow the provisions included in the DOJ financial guide, as well as uniform guidance for federal awards in 2 CFR 200 when completing both this category and the personnel category. So this third section is the travel category. Travel costs are expenses for transportation, lodging, subsistence, and other related items incurred by staff personnel who are in travel status on official business. For example, if you're traveling to DC for an OVC training. In this section, you'll itemize all proposed travel expenses and describe the purpose of each expenditure in reference to the project objectives. The basis of computation that needs to be included in the narrative portion of this section should correspond to the details that you put in each individual expense line. Also in the narrative, be sure to state whether the budget numbers are based on the tribal entity's travel policies or if you're using the federal travel regulations. On the same topic, we want to remind you that you may reimburse travelers' expenses in accordance with your written travel policy, but just make sure that those rates do not exceed those federally approved rates for the location of the travel, and that you're in compliance with the provisions included in the DOJ Grants Financial Guide. So this category, this travel section, is for staff and employee travel expenses. Travel expenses for consultants are going to be listed under the consultant travel fields in the subaward, subgrants, and the procurement contracts budget categories. So now Jenny's going to walk you through the next couple of categories.
Thanks. So here we have an example of the equipment category. Equipment is defined as tangible personal property. Tangible is just a fancy way of saying things you can touch. This category also includes information technology systems. The main difference between equipment and supplies is that equipment must have a useful life of more than 1 year and a per unit acquisition cost of $5,000 or greater. Your entity may have a slightly lower capitalization threshold of less than $5,000. So be sure to check with your finance department about that. If the item doesn't meet those thresholds, it goes under the supplies category. In the budget narrative, explain how the equipment is necessary for the success of the project and describe the procurement methods to be used. Remember that all equipment obtained with grant funds must be reasonable and necessary for project purposes. Here we have an example of the supplies category. You can use award funds to purchase supplies necessary for carrying out project activities. Supplies are all the other types of tangible personal property that don't fall into the equipment category. This also includes computing devices that cost less than $5,000 per unit, or again, your entity's capitalization threshold, if that's less than $5,000. For both equipment and supplies, grantees must follow the provisions included in the DOJ Grants Financial Guide under Chapter 3.7 Property Standards and the Part 200 Uniform Requirements for federal awards. This is an example of the construction category. This is a non-construction award program, and construction costs are generally unallowable. However, for this award, costs incurred as an incidental and necessary part of a victim service program are generally allowable under the other category. These costs are limited to minor renovation, remodeling, maintenance, and repair costs. These costs also include site preparation and installation of mobile or modular buildings. Please note that these costs do not include costs that constitute capital expenditures. It's very important that you consult with your OVC grant manager to discuss environmental review requirements and timing associated with these activities. More significant construction activities are generally unallowable. Additionally, you must follow provisions included in the DOJ Grants Financial Guide under Chapter 3.8 Procurement. And now Christine is going to talk to you about subawards.
So this next image you see on the screen is the subawards or subgrants category. This section should be used to describe subawards, which can also, again, be referred to as subgrants, which the lead or prime grantee makes to its subrecipients to carry out part of the required programmatic activities under the grant. In this section, you'll describe the federal award activities that are proposed to be carried out by the subrecipient and the estimated costs associated with those activities. As a reminder, an agreement that meets the criteria I just noted should be categorized as a subaward, not a procurement contract. Even if your entity refers to the subaward agreement as a type of contract, it should still be included in the subaward category of the budget file. Similarly, you want to make sure that you don't include regular procurement contracts in this section. As with the other sections, we just want to remind you that you should follow the provisions in the DOJ Grants Financial Guide and Part 200 Uniform Requirements as you work through this section of the budget. Now, this page shows you the example of the procurement contracts category that I just referenced before. So in this section, you'll include costs associated with procuring goods or services for the benefit of the grantee. You'll describe the product or service to be procured with a contract and an estimate of the cost. For each consultant included in this section, you'll include their name, if you already know it, the service to be provided, the hourly or daily rate based on an 8-hour day, and the estimated time they'll need to complete their service. Just a reminder that consultant fees in excess of the OJP OVC maximum rate for an 8-hour day would need prior approval from the sponsor and require additional justification. And those current maximum amounts are $650 per day or $81.25 per hour. In the narrative portion of this section, similar to the other cost categories, you'll need to indicate whether you'll be following your entity's written procurement policy or following the federal acquisition regulation. It is encouraged to promote free and open competition when awarding procurement contracts. And we also want you to just keep in mind that the sole source procurement contracts in excess of $150,000 would require a separate justification and prior approval from OVC. And again, as we've mentioned with the other cost categories, just a reminder to follow the provisions included in the DOJ Grants Financial Guide and Uniform Guidance for Federal Awards in 2 CFR 200. These detail requirements and restrictions imposed on recipients and subawardees that use federal assistance to procure property or services needed to carry out your activities. And Jenny's going to cover the last 2 categories. Jenny?
Thanks, Christine. This is an example of the other costs category. Costs that don't fit into the other budget categories, but are necessary for the project are set out in this category. This is the category where you would typically include emergency or short-term victim needs like clothing, personal hygiene products, and transportation or transitional housing assistance for victims. This is also where you would include non-tangible items like cell phone bills, utilities, or registration fees for trainings. Specific details about the quantity, per unit costs, and period of time needed are used to calculate the total costs. The narrative provides additional brief details for each line item. Remember to follow the provisions included in the DOJ Grants Financial Guide and Part 200 of the Uniform Requirements for Federal Awards. Here we have an example of the indirect costs category. Indirect costs are costs that aren't allocable to a specific project. They can include things like overhead, administration, or facility maintenance. Indirect costs may be charged to an award only if the recipient has a current, unexpired, federally approved indirect cost rate, or the recipient is eligible to use and elects to use the de minimis indirect cost rate of 10%. In the budget narrative, explain how the indirect cost numbers were generated, including what categories are included in your base rate. Although we're not covering the actual submission of your budget in Just Grants today, we want to remind you to not horse around. Avoid the last-minute stampede and set a goal of entering all your information well in advance of the due date in case you encounter any difficulties. OVC will be presenting a webinar on the Just Grants submission process next week on May 20th from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A few tips about submitting your application. You'll need to have an application submitter assigned in Just Grants. This person will submit the application. They'll also be responsible for selecting the authorized representative in Just Grants. The authorized representative is the person who has signing authority for your entity. You'll want to make sure this person has access to JustGrants. Once you've submitted the application submitter, entity administrator, and authorized representative will receive a confirmation email. And just a couple more important notes. The formulas in the budget detail worksheet and the embedded form in JustGrants round up differently, and you may not be able to cut and paste from one form to another. And now Christine is going to talk about some challenges and keys to success.
You're almost ready to grab the bull by the horns. The last section today, we just wanted to go through a few common challenges as well as some tips for success. We're going to start off with the top challenges that we've seen. So the points listed on this slide are related to the top 5 challenges that you may experience when you develop your budget. As we mentioned earlier, the formulas in the BDW round differently than the calculations in the JustGrants embedded form. So just keep an eye out for that. When you're populating your budget information in JustGrants, you may need to make some minor adjustments as you work through it. The second one is preparing a budget that is mathematically sound and that corresponds with the information described in the project narrative and also aligns with the project design. So it is one of the top challenges. So again, just keep that in mind as you're working through to try and address those. The third, properly linking all costs outlined in the budget detail worksheet to the project narrative. The fourth one, ensuring that the requested funding is consistent with the allowable activities under the solicitation and the DOJ grants financial guide. The fifth one, correctly identifying a subaward versus procurement relationships. And by pointing out these challenges now, again, it's just something you can keep in mind as you're working through your budget development process so that you have a better chance of avoiding these when it comes time for submission. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Jenny to talk about the keys to success.
Thanks, Christine. So we just wanted to go over our keys to a successful budgeting process. Number 1 is read the solicitation carefully. Make sure your budget is realistic and aligns with your project's goals and objectives. Involve project staff and other stakeholders in the budgeting process. Try to determine actual costs on big ticket items and remember to factor in shipping and/or delivery or freight fees. Document everything. This will be very important in managing the budget throughout the year. And finally, customize your process. The steps each entity takes will be somewhat different. So we have one more chat box question for you. Do you feel ready to develop your budget? And if not, what can we do to help? Please type your answers into the chat box. It looks like we're getting a lot of yeses. It's exciting. We've got some mostly, some no's, some more yeses.
Okay, so we're going to jump to the next part. If there's any questions in the chat box, we will get to a Q&A portion at the end. But for now, we just want to go to the next slide. And I just wanted to let you guys know that a 1-page job aid should have been sent to you with a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation. And we're also going to include a link to this 1-page job aid in the chat box. It's a good guide to keep on hand as you work through the budget development process. It just covers some key points that Jenny and I talked about today. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Anne.
Hello again, everybody. I know that was a lot of information to digest. Thank you so much, TFMC, for going through all that information. And luckily, this webinar is being recorded. As I mentioned, it will be sent out in about 2 weeks if you need a refresher. And you should have received the presentation materials prior to this webinar, but I believe they're going to resend them again. So I just wanted to go through some additional resources before we get into the Q&A. So OVC has a dedicated page for tribal specific information. I'll add this webpage to the chat, but it's also listed on the slide. At the site, there is webinar information, FAQs, and other relevant publications. And here is a list of the contact information that will be really important for you as you prepare your applications. First, there's grants.gov, and they will be able to provide technical assistance when you submit your SF424 and your SFLLL. And then there is the Just Grants contact information that can provide technical assistance when you're submitting your full application. For assistance with any other requirements of the solicitation, you can contact your OVC grant manager if you have one. We realize everyone that is submitting materials do not. So we have listed the OVC Tribal Set-Aside web address and then the TFMC address. Please note that OVC or TFMC cannot help you with issues when you're submitting your application materials. So if you're having technical issues, please contact the grants.gov or the Just Grants information. And I know that they mentioned this, but here's a specific slide just to point it out again. It's a very important upcoming webinar on May 20th, beginning at 12:30 Eastern Time. This will go through a step-by-step guide on how you submit your application in Just Grants. And there is one section that walks you specifically through how to submit your budget using that embedded form. So I think that will be really helpful follow-up to this webinar. I'll add a link to the chat box for you to register for the webinar. If you can attend, there are recordings on the Just Grants training webpage, and I will provide a link to that chat box as well, so you can view that at your own time. And here are just some final deadlines. I know we've already included this, but one of the listed here is if you request an interview in lieu of your project narrative. That deadline is passed, but I do know several of you are taking advantage of this new opportunity. And please mark your calendars for the other deadlines. Grants.gov, again, is today, and the Just Grants application deadline is Monday, June 14th. And now I will turn it back over to TFMC, and we will get to the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Anne. TFMC serves tribal communities across 5 different time zones. To accommodate grantees, our main hours of operation are spread out to maximize our availability. Our virtual support center is open from noon to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Alaska Standard Time. TFMC staff are available beyond those times, as our staff is also located throughout the country. Call or email us to connect at your convenience. And back to you, April.
All right. Great presentation, ladies. So right now it's time for our question and answer comment section of our webinar. If you're connected by phone or using a cell or landline and you want to participate in the question and answer portion, you can submit your questions to tfmc@ovctfmc.org. And we had a few questions that we received with the registration. And so Christine, I'm going to read the first question. If you can take that one, please. Can we request funding for victims' meals while they are waiting and completing forensic interviews and SANE examinations?
So for this one in general, food costs are not an allowable expense and shouldn't be included in your budget. However, OVC does realize that there are circumstances that may make these costs allowable on a case-by-case basis. So your OVC grant manager or that general email address that Anne provided earlier is your best resource for this. So we highly recommend reaching out to them to explain your specific situation and request their guidance on it.
Oh, great answer. Thank you, Christine. All right, the next question. Can we continue current salaries to the new grant? Jenny, would you like to take that one?
Sure, thanks, April. Again, as we mentioned before, your OVC grant manager is the best resource for questions related to allowable versus unallowable costs, and you should typically run questions through them. But generally, this would be allowable if the positions relate to the new funding objectives and are in line with the allowable personnel costs listed in the solicitation chart.
All right, good job. Next question. Is there a user-friendly budget template you can type narrative out in Word and paste into a document? Christine, would you like to take that one?
Thanks, April. Absolutely. So the budget template that we walk through today is a template you should use when you're preparing your budget. You can prepare the narrative pieces in a separate document or form and copy them into the BDW. But we do just want to remind you that that copy and paste function may not work when you're transferring that information to the embedded Just Grants form.
All right, thank you, Christine. All right, and next question. Will the webinar be recorded? Jenny?
Yeah, this webinar is being recorded, and notifications about when it'll be available will be sent to all the participants who have registered. We're thinking it should be available within 2 weeks.
All right, thank you, Jenny. So we also have been taking questions through the chat box, and Sean Minnick and Tara Ballesteros have been monitoring the chat box. Sean, would you like to speak to any of the questions in the chat box?
Yes, thank you so much, April, for that. We're getting great questions, FYI, so thank you all. I have a question that I am reading from Cynthia. Your question is that if you are sending victims to receive counseling at a counseling center where you have a contract, is that a procurement contract or a subaward? That will be a procurement contract. My understanding is that in this scenario, you've contracted services with an external counseling center. That would be a procurement contract. I hope I answered that question.
That was a great answer. Thank you, Sean. All right.
Well,
Any other questions in the chat box?
I believe it was one more from Clarice. What section would you put background check fees? Interesting question. What I would ask, what would the purpose of the background checks be used? The background check fees be used? I think that sometime with these kind of costs, the purpose of the background check would definitely have a factor or a impact on the response. Could you send me that question directly, Clarice, and I could dig into it a little bit for you?
All right, Anne, would you have any more feedback on that question?
So right now,
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. I
Okay.
believe that would be in the other category, but if you email, yeah, Sean and I can answer that if you email directly. We'll make sure we confirm that for you.
All right, great. All right, Sean or Tara, do we have any other questions in the chat box at this time?
I am combing through the messages. I do see one. Let me look. My fingers are moving too fast. I believe it's from Lulu, is asking if you have a current OVC grant, can they also apply for this program?
This is Christine.
And
And correct,
for that one.
yeah, I was just gonna say,
Yep.
I believe you can, as long as they don't cross over in expenses. But Anne, I don't know if you want to confirm that.
No, that is perfect. I was just going to say, as long as the activities are not duplicative to another award, yes, you are eligible to apply.
All right, I see one more question in the chat box from Ann Cross. It says, in the BDW, where would you put the administrative costs or costs associated with construction costs? These are not IDC costs. Who would like to take that?
Where would we put administrative costs, like the costs associated with construction costs? And I'd have to read the solicitation to see what the construction costs, if those are allowable and how are they allowable. To my understanding, construction costs generally aren't allowable.
Yeah, Sean, I just want to add, I think for this one, we might need a little bit more detail. And again, we just need a little bit more detail on maybe what those specific administrative costs you're referring to are before we could provide guidance in which category it would belong.
Yes, and if the administrative costs are salary for personnel, it should go into personnel.
Right.
But again, we might need a little more information. I'm not sure if that's the question you're asking.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, let's say the administrative costs, or they could possibly also fall under the contractual category. But again, without additional details, it's hard to really pinpoint exactly where they would go.
All right, thank you, guys. Sean, do you see anything else in the chat box?
This is Jenny. We have another question that was sent in. And this question was, are there both a BDW and an online budget form in JustGrants to complete? Anne, can you help us out with that one?
I'm sorry, I was reading through the other chat to make sure if I missed anything. Can you repeat that?
Sure. The question was, is there both a BDW and an online budget form in JustGrants to complete?
So there is just the embedded JustGrants form. And that's why we're really recommending everyone attend that How to Submit an Application webinar, because it'll automatically pull up this embedded form. This webinar was using the budget detail worksheet as a guide because we thought it would be helpful for you to have this kind of completed in advance, that you could perhaps copy the information so you wouldn't be just putting it directly into that embedded form just from scratch. But you do not need to submit the budget detail worksheet in your application. It would be helpful if you did so, but you don't need to submit that. It will be like this embedded form in JustGrants. But this is all described in that application webinar, so we highly recommend that you do that, but using the budget detail worksheet as a guide. So hopefully that answers the question. This is kind of the first year for this JustGrants embedded form, so I wish I could be more specific, but I unfortunately can't.
All right, thank you for your great questions. The next question we have from Samantha Rice: can you utilize indirect in year 1 and operating budget year 2, or do they have to be combined in the same year? Anne, would you like to take that?
I don't think I understand that question. Sorry, you might need to email that directly. I don't think I understand that question.
Yes, so just I think I may have a general understanding of what it's asking. So the operating budget, I think you may be referring to the direct cost portion of the budget. So you can't incur any indirect cost if you haven't incurred the direct cost. So hopefully that helps address it. But if you wanted to add a little bit more detail around your question, we might be able to get you a better answer.
All right, Samantha, I think I'll work with you so you can send that question to me if you'd like. Okay, next question. The deadline is today to upload the forms. Is there an extension or should I not apply in grants.gov?
So this is Anne. I was told that we're waiting for OCFO to give an opinion on that. We don't have any official guidance on any sort of extensions, nor could we 100% say that we are allowing them at this time. But
All right, thank you, Anne. Another question. Thank you. Keep the questions coming. This was a follow-up to Ann Cross's question a little bit earlier. She said these costs are administrative costs. It's not salary costs, but costs incurred for saying, hold on one second. For saying going to bid openings and on-site monitoring of the construction project.
And do you want
Sean,
to
yeah.
take that one?
Yeah, this is,
I mean, it sounds like it would be, oh, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
no, you start then. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, it seems like it would be under other costs, but I'm not sure if those costs that they're specifically saying are allowable. So we may have to reach out to OCFO
Yeah.
about those specific costs, or if you have a grant manager, reach out to them. But it seems like to me that would be under other costs.
Yeah, it will be, but I want to preface, just say it again, just, if you can shoot us that specific
Mhm.
scenario, then we can look into it a bit more to give you an accurate answer.
So this is Christine again. I just want to, so a lot of the times when there's questions that come in, it's the context around the specific situation that helps us determine whether something's allowable or not, or what kind of cost category it may belong in, which is why TFMC is here to help kind of with that individualized assistance. So again, I know we provided our contact information before, but if we're not directly answering the questions you have, you can definitely reach out to us and we can set up a time to talk about it in a little bit more detail.
All right, next question, Sean.
I
This
am.
is from Leah David.
Okay.
Under other costs, can we purchase small snacks to go with traditional healing groups for women and men, such as crackers, tea, coffee to go with their traditional jarred fish or dry meat? I did hear that no food is allowable, but if they were to have healing groups, is it possible for small stuff?
This is Christine.
So
I'll
this
take that.
is Anne.
Oh, go ahead, Anne.
Okay, go ahead, Christine. No, go
Nope.
ahead. You can go.
Okay, I was just going to say, we just want to reiterate that your OVC grant manager is the best point of contact for these specific types of questions. And again, if you don't have that OVC grant manager yet, there was that general OVC email address that Anne had provided earlier that we can provide for you again.
And just to follow up, this is Anne. The food, it's interesting. It's generally a case-by-case basis for something like this. This is something that would be allowable, but again, it's generally a case-by-case basis and depending on the cost and kind of it's related to victim services. So if you are including some small costs for food, just make sure that they do relate to your program and to victim services. And also with the caveat that it may be determined to be unallowable by your grant manager or by OCFO when the program is funded.
All right, thank you, ladies. All right, next question. Do you have to start spending grant funds beginning year one, or can you start spending the grant the following year? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah.
Anne, are you okay to
This
take
is
that one?
Anne. Yeah, I mean, generally we would begin your project at year, when the program starts. So I guess I would wonder why you would wait a year to implement the project. But you have the allotted time and you're asking to do the project. So I guess it's, again, that kind of seems like a case by case basis. I guess I'd just be curious as to why you would wait a year to implement.
All right, next question, Harold. This one's from Harold. So there are two deadlines, right? Today is for the SF 424 and the SFLLL, and June 14th for the full application.
That is correct. The full application is not due until June 14th. The SF 424 and the SFLLL are done in the grants.gov system, and the full application is submitted into Just Grants. And in the presentation materials, you'll see the contact information for both of those if you have any issues with those submissions.
All right, and one of the questions was, who shall I send the email to? And for those that are joining us by phone, TFMC's email address is tfmc@ovctfmc.org. So that's all the questions that I see listed in the chat box. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, well, thank you all for putting your questions. Lulu just asked if there will be a recording of this. Yes, there will, and will be, and we will be letting you know when we send that out in approximately 2 weeks. All right, if that's all the questions, we'll go to the next slide. So we provided a lot of information today that we hope will be helpful. We try to develop resources and learnings that are beneficial to you. So if there are other topics that would be useful, please send those topics to us. We also offer technical support and FY21 TVSSA application support. So we could provide assistance with financial pieces of the application, including the budget worksheet and budget narrative. And for additional information or assistance, you can contact us at tfmc@ovctfmc.org or by calling 703-462-6900. All right, next slide. On the next slide, we have some great references for you. And these will be sent to you as well. It's Application Mechanics and Just Grants, Application Mechanics, Frequently Asked Questions, just various references that can help you throughout your grant journey. All right, and in the next slide, we also have some more references that will be sent to you, like the OJP Budget Detail Workshop, OJP Grant Application Resource Drive, and the TFMC Braving the Budget webinar resource page. Thank you all for joining us today. And please look for a survey that will be sent immediately after the conclusion of this webinar. The webinar has been recorded and will be available to you within 2 weeks. And it'll be found at https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/TFMC webinar 9. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you and working with you to better serve victims of crime. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.